Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, people of all ages, welcome back to the Sticky Floors podcast. I am one of your hosts, CJ. I am joined by Mr. Will, and tonight we are talking about Minority Report. So, for everybody that is joining us now, we are out of the Black History Month movies, and I got to tell you, it is a joy to listen to watch a movie that I didn't feel emotionally attached to. Cause look, this is easy, man. The Black History Month joints. I was getting text messages from people talking about what you mean 4 stars for Malcolm X. Like people were mad. I'm getting threats and everything. Like it's rough out here, man. I'm like, let me talk about these regular movies, man, with Tom Cruise and everything where it's safe. So that's what we're doing. We're doing Minority Report tonight, man. Mr. Will, first of all, how you doing tonight? How you doing
Oh
today,
man,
man?
I'm doing real well. How are you, CJ? What's going on
I'm
with you,
good.
man?
I'm good, man. I feel safe because we're talking about this joint. So why don't you give the people a quick overview of Minority Report, and then we can do what we do with it.
For those that were texting to call him a man, CJ, just understand he was putting on his movie critic hat. It had nothing to do about indictment of black people and the social conditions surrounding some of the things that ail us, man. Oh man. But back on target. We're dealing with Minority Report, and this is a cinematic version of the age-long debate of what came first, the chicken or the egg. The line spoken by Max Van Sydow's character Lamar Burgess, rest in power. We don't choose the things we believe in; they choose us. Capsulizes this notion of free will versus predetermination. One of the main themes in this film is the fact that things are already determined, and this is such a thing as free will existed.
Yeah, and you know what's great about what's amazing about this movie and the idea of like precognition is there's so much technology that's in this movie
Hmm.
that foreshadowed what we have right now. Like
Yeah,
that whole thing with the screens and moving them with the hand, like that is what you get with the whole metaverse, Apple
yeah,
Vision Pro thing, the idea of the electric cars. That's like, of course, we got that now. How about that the electric car can drive you where it wants you to go when you don't want
yeah,
to go there? That's crazy. The screens that tailor the messages for you, like obviously they show that with advertisements, but you know, as your phone is doing that all the time,
yeah,
you know, and the constant like facial recognition, retina scan. Like I remember the first iPhone that did like the retinal scan joint. Now
yeah.
they do your face all the time. That's what's
Hmm.
happening, and we look at it as convenience, and then last but not least, you know, you have those animal like drones, the spiders. And
Yeah,
you know, like now they have like the robots, the robot dogs and everything that they got sticking on people. So there's a lot of stuff in this movie that was like telling the future for where things would be in 2024.
yeah. That's the part that quite quite frankly frightens me. The fact that we're talking about a police state. Um, this overhandedness. I mean, like we're literally coming from a period where there was no TSA to now there is a TSA. And when you go to
Hmm.
TSA or a flight rather, you got to take off your shoes, your belt. You got to make sure that all of your personal belongings are in the little carriage pace, your phone, you name it. Everything has to be labeled, clear liquids, the clear bag. We're just talking about merely one aspect of how this movie has come into fruition in the real world. That's not me even making any commentary with respect to the whole like John seeking out relief, if you will, escapism. In his choice, it's through medication, self medication,
Hmm.
and we're talking
Hmm.
now. I mean, before uh, individuals wouldn't hesitate to call someone crazy, even though it was dismissive and it wasn't clinical diagnosis of such. Now it's been rephrased as mental health.
Hmm.
So you could characterize John as going through struggles and his mental health was being affected. Hence the reason why he and his wife divorced, because she even says it. I kept
Yeah,
seeing my dead son. I didn't see my husband.
yeah. And the idea of, you know, another thing, and you just touched on it, was the idea of like recreational drug use,
Mhm.
right? And the one of I call her the plant lady, so the killer
Yeah,
plant
yeah,
lady,
yeah,
when she
yeah.
talks about like how the precogs are actually the children of people that were hooked on a stronger
Mhm.
version of the drug that Tom Cruise's character John Addington is using.
Yeah.
And then she also says like the idea of how now the drug is used by like the more intellectual people. So even like the idea of recreational drug use is present. And now, modern day America, you have dispensaries. It used to be like marijuana was, considered the gateway drug to death.
Yes.
But now there's dispensaries on every block and every corner. So even that was something that the movie predicted.
Well, that's the whole aspect of how the government is so heavy-handed. They were able to tax the drugs. So that's what really prevented anyone from, having legalization of marijuana in this instance. But even before then, if you go back to the movie Scarface, which touches upon this in the real world,
Oh,
we're
that's a
looking at
classic.
Griselda Blanca, and Miami was very heavy into cocaine, and that was a party drug, and it was for
Hmm.
the upper echelon, the rich, the 1%. Fast forward to the late 80s, early 90s, and you got crack, which is nothing more than a cheaper version of it with more
Hmm.
with stiffer and harsher penalties.
Yep.
And also the racial component doesn't really help things too. And then fast forward to that, and now you have the opioid quote unquote epidemic or crisis. And they weren't
Hmm.
saying that about crack. They weren't saying that about marijuana. In fact, if you go back even further, when they did make cannabism, excuse me, cannibal. Why am I saying cannibal? Cannabis. I
Cannabis.
guess cannabis. I think I'm thinking of Hannibal Lecter, but
Yeah,
when
you
they're
were.
thinking about cannabis, the fact that they made it such a federal offense to even have possession of it was merely because of the so-called stereotype that black people became super empowered by it, and thus the reason why they had to criminalize it. And
Yeah.
another thing too, with the same thing with cocaine, you're talking about these individuals that Dr. Freud, it's in Coca-Cola, everybody was
Hmm.
using it, and then all of a sudden it becomes criminalized. Why? Because it was believed that blacks had superhuman strength once they were on it.
Yeah. And that's not true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not true. But what's funny is like when you mentioned the part about, because like, okay, so some part of this is the idea of the society at large, and this is like 2046. This
Yeah.
is the not so distant future now from where we are, but there's like this idea that people are now relying on these precognitive individuals to help them identify crimes. What's interesting is that they from the beginning they say, well, okay, we can catch premeditated crimes, or we can catch crimes of passion. We
Mhm.
can't catch rapes. So they said you
Mhm.
can't catch rape. So rape still happen. Rape's still a crime. And then also, when you talked about everything about the crack and cocaine, they also didn't say anything about drug overdoses.
No.
And they also can't catch suicides. So they can't. So there's like still like limitations to it, which I actually like that. I feel like Steven Spielberg and the team of people he brought in to develop this movie really thought about the architecture of the world they were creating
Mhm.
and tried to make the idea of precognition as scientific as possible.
Well, see, that's the part where I have a quasi issue with, because you're literally talking about that one component where John becomes a true believer and is recruited merely because his son is kidnapped. So he's abducted. They can't foresee that either. So that I have a
Mhm.
problem with their main source, inspiration, lead, the face of the unit, the leader. He becomes one of their most devout individuals. And notice I am using the word devout. Um,
Mhm.
Based upon a crime happening to him. And even when Daniel, Colin Farrell's character, and thus another biblical reference, he says, look, I'm a true believer in all this, and his motives are selfish. He wants to take over, hence a
Yeah.
la Cain and Abel. So you got a lot of parallels there with their inspirations, the reasons why, the genesis of how this started. And then the human aspect of jealousy, envy. Uh, Max's character, Lamar, he's very adamant. He's coming out of retirement. Why? Because he sees a golden opportunity because
Mhm.
his son, if you will, has failed him, and now he's come to reclaim what was right, what he deems is rightfully his.
Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned when you said, like, the genesis of it, I mean, you kinda can't help but talk about the biblical kinda overtones to it.
Hmm.
Obviously, like, there's 3 precogs, and that's
Hmm.
allusion to the Holy Trinity. The room that they're in is called the temple.
Right.
The cops see themselves as priests.
Hmm.
Colin Farrell's character, Danny, always kisses the cross
Yeah.
before he does anything, like including
Hmm.
have a fist fight, which is I don't even know why I did that there
When do you have
because
time to do that in the real world?
right in a real fight, a real fight. No, they
Not
do in
having.
here. I'm going to talk about that in my later on in here, but yeah, it's very much in there, and there's also whenever you're dealing with the idea of predetermination, it's always going to be juxtaposed against free will, and then that always juxtaposes
Yeah.
it with the idea of free will and free choice and what
Right.
God allows people to have.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing when we talk about what is permitted. So in this society, it's permissible to commit all these other crimes. It's permissible to, literally John's jumping from his car to another car to another. That's
Hmm.
they're going through other people's homes, like all these things. That's whatever. Even with the police, literally, they don't have a warrant. They just start searching people to see who's inside this particular apartment, and
Hmm.
invasion of privacy. There's no Miranda rights. There's no probable cause. Children are being retinal scanned, people in the midst of having intercourse, arguments. Like, it's just so funny how even in that one scene where the wife and the husband are arguing, they stop
They
mid
stop when the
mid
retinal
argument
scans happen.
just to get scared. And it's always like this is a daily occurrence. So
Hmm.
how much that leads to the question then of how much are we willing to sacrifice or give or willingly give up our rights and freedoms in the name of security, stability, and peace?
Well, I think that's an underlying theme in the movie is the
Yeah.
idea of do you give up your choice to be free
Right.
or to even define what freedom is for yourself in a world where you're allowing the potential future to dictate how your life is going to go, and the idea of like the police state, because like these people in the modern in the future in this, they're constantly under surveillance.
Hmm.
Every time they get on the metro or get off it, their eyes are being scanned, which is why you
Yeah.
can't really hide or go anywhere. And like you said, the idea of those little invasive spider things, which are terrifying,
Mm.
going in people's houses and scanning their eyes, like just like you said, people treat that as if it's a regular occurrence. What's interesting about that scene is that it happens in an environment that seems to suggest that people were of a lower income.
Yeah.
And they never really show that happen in like a quote unquote nice area in DC.
Hmm. Yeah.
So it's almost like it happens in a slum. So there's still like this idea of there's a certain level of treatment that can be levied upon a certain economic social class of people.
Well, that's the funny thing too. You mentioned about the subway, and there's no jump in the turnstiles in that joint, man. Like you
Yeah, they're
do
gonna get
that,
you.
they know they're gonna get you,
They're
and
gonna get you.
that speaks to the social economic divisions between the haves and the have-nots, which is also funny because these themes are really part of the source material, which is the scientific novella by Philip K. Dix back in 1956, where he was writing about instead of precogs being telepaths, he's talking about mutants. So you got three mutants, and they're able to see into the future. Um, Still the same police state, still called the pre-crime division, where they're arresting suspects prior to them actually committing a crime, which
Hmm.
we'll get to later. And you still have the same individual named John Adderton, who's the head of the police department or that specific division, and him being charged, if you will, for a crime he hasn't commit, and him attempting to solve that mystery.
Yeah, and it's what I was trying to figure out is the Department of Pre-Crime, is it actually the police?
Well,
I
yeah,
was trying to
I
I was
think it
trying to
is.
figure out because they're not called the police, they're called the Department of Pre-Crime,
Hmm.
which department usually means that it's a part of the federal system or the
Hmm.
government system, but like and like in DC, you don't have like the Department of Police. You have the police department, but
Mhm.
you'll have the Department of State or the
Yeah.
Department of Labor. So it seems like it's an agency, but it also, because it's the creation of two citizens, it's also like a private company in its own sense as well. So
Well,
it's interesting, this idea of like the private company creates this system and technology, the government wants to get it and utilize it, and the people are kind of just left blowing in the wind.
that's the funny part. I mean, you got like so many things going on here. So you have the privatization of things that were first in the governmental aspect of how they started and being implemented, which is
Hmm.
basically what happens in the real world, which is why this movie is telling on itself. The government gets this technology first, they utilize it for X amount of years, then you'll see a commercial. The commercial is now presented to the public like, hey, this is what's going on, yada yada yada. Same thing happens into the military. You got like these special forces, Delta, SEALs team, Green Berets. All of a sudden, their contract ends. They're either honorably or dishonorably discharged. They go into the public center where they're privatized corporate agencies going across the world. Hence, another movie we talked about early in the season. Um, and then this movie itself also talks about this authoritarian system based upon Cold War themes. All of a sudden you're also contrasting and comparing that with the anxieties that produced, and you're dealing with potential individual autonomy. You're talking about the knowledge of future events and what do you do with that knowledge. Is it dangerous to even have it or contemplate that even goes into a whole series of other movies, like the movie with what's his name, Ben Affleck, and who's the guy that played the Two Face in what you call
Oh,
his name?
Tommy Lee,
No, 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 not him. The other one, blonde haired guy in.
Heath Ledger.
No, that was the Joker. But either
Oh,
with
dang,
the
that was the.
but the guy
Oh, yeah, I know Aaron Eckhart.
Aaron Eck, there you go. Thank you. And the reason why I bring that up is in this movie, it echoes those same themes. We're talking about the choice that individuals makes. So Agatha tells John, hey, you have a choice. Again, more
Hmm.
biblical names, when he has the knowledge of what is inevitably going to happen, or at least
Yeah,
so they see.
yeah. I mean that the idea of the choice, that's running all through the movie, and it's kind of like choice versus destiny,
Yeah.
which is like a, you said in the very beginning, that's like a struggle that mankind has wrestled with for a long time, and this is one movie that's kind of playing that drama out. But you mentioned one of the precogs, Agatha, and the precogs are named Agatha, Arthur, and Dashiell, right?
Yep.
And I know that you have like a reference points for that. So can you just share what those are real quick so
Yeah. So
everybody can know what you know?
this Oh, that's an interesting point, and I love the way you phrase that, because that's what this movie is about, knowing what everybody else knows, because everybody only has pieces and bits of the pie. No one has the entirety of everything going on. But with respect to that, you got Agatha Christie, writer of many
Mm.
crime novels and things of that
Murder
ilk.
mysteries. Yep.
Murder.
Yep.
Yep. Then you got of course, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes, another famous author
Got
um,
it.
of
Yes.
those things. But the last one is a tricky one, and I actually had to do some research on that, because at first I was thinking L is always meaning like God, but in fact it's
Hmm.
not. In this case, the gentleman's name, ironically enough, is Samuel, another L,
Mm. Hmm.
Dashiell Hammett, and he is also an author, another American author who created characters like Sam Spade in the Maltese Falcon, very famous.
A
Uh,
detective. Yeah. Detective
yeah,
story. Yep.
Nick and Nora Charles, that's in The Thin Man. The Continental Op, that's the Red Harvest and the Dane Curse. And then, of course, the comic book strip character Secret Agent X-9. So, throughout this movie, these three individuals are very pivotal as far as like disclosing where, what, when, and how. Agatha is the most powerful of the three. The two brothers
Hmm.
are twins. And the funny part about that, too, is this is the first Steven Spielberg movie that later became a TV show, and that
Mm-hmm.
TV show starred Megan Good as the detective, and Dashel is now on his own, and he's trying to make amends and help her out, solve these crimes. But there's still individuals out there in the real world, quote unquote, real world, that want to utilize the precogs and go back to using them
The
to
way that it
solve.
was.
Yeah, so I thought that was very interesting that that later became a TV show for about a year.
Yeah, before it got I
Yeah,
read that too before it got
yeah.
before they pulled the plug on it. I would say the last thing that I thought was you last one more reference point was the idea of numbers and perspective,
Yeah.
because there's a big thing made out of the number 9 and 6.
Mhm.
And 9 and 6 are basically, depending on where you set them up from a different perspective, it looks like that. So if I'm sitting across the table from you, I
Mirror.
could draw a 9. It looks like a 9 to me. It looks like a 6 to you.
Well,
And
that's funny that you say that too, because if you're dealing with numerology, the 6 and 9 is the sign for Cancer, and they're supposed to
mhm,
be very empathetic, intuitive, and hence you have the precogs being very empathetic, intuitive, wanting you to see. And that's another thing Agatha always telling John: "Don't you see?
can you
Can't you
see?
see?
Can you
Can you
see?
see?"
Hmm.
So you touching upon those numbers of 6 and 9 are very significant.
Yeah, and it also is kind of like referencing the idea that what you're seeing isn't necessarily the whole picture,
Hmm.
but what you're seeing is like a certain perspective based on your vantage point, which
Correct.
is also kind of all layered through this movie experiment, and it's talking about was it free will, and how does that work out. So yeah, so that's that. We've talked about a couple of things in the movie that we've talked about the movie in general, but in terms of like the scenes and things that we stood out that we liked, there's a couple things that I really dug about this movie. I referenced one of them before.
Hmm.
I like that they really were thoughtful about the architecture of how the
Mm,
precognition thing works,
yeah.
right? So they show you like the precogs, and they gotta lay in like that bath and the pictures, and they got the wires all in their head. And I like the little ball gets the numbers on it, and it rolls down the thing, and
Hmm.
it's kind of elaborate, but it's like I like that they thought it out, and I like that they made rules when they didn't have to,
Hmm.
because the rules and the limitations are what makes it seem like it's real. Because it'd be very easy to say, "Nah, this is crazy," and it
Yeah.
is in some ways crazy. But the more structure you put around it, the more it seems to make sense like that. So that was one of the things that I really liked about it. The other thing that I really liked is I like that everybody that John knows is essentially a dirtbag. They're all dirtbags. Let's just run it down real quick in case, for people who have seen it, right? So first, you got the guy that I'm going to affectionately refer to as the eye doctor, who's definitely a dirtbag, right? Who was in jail for something else before he started being somebody who does eyeball replacement, which that sounds sketchy. Then he's
Shout
got
out to
the
Peter Stormare, and then CJ's referencing Dr. Solomon P. Eddie.
yes, the eye doctor. So him. Then you got the video guy who like admits that he's having inappropriate thoughts about his own cousin. So he's a complete dirtbag too. These are John's crew. This is who John rolls with. Then he's got, the killer plant lady, who everything that she makes is like a violent plant that he has to go to for advice. And then his real man's Lamar, who's like the guy who created the whole business model for this thing. He's like, no spoiler alert, he's like the most super thugged out dude in the whole movie. He's like Ghost from Power. Like he wears a suit, and then he's like, "Oh, I gotta get out and do business. So let me put the gun, I take the gun out." He becomes like a serial killer in the last 30 minutes of this movie. Well, we'll get to that. But the point is that regardless of those are the cake, that's the things that I really liked about it. What
Okay,
what what are some of the things that you really dug?
so CJ mentioned Lois Smith, who plays Dr. Iris Henneman. Um, I gotta say, she is a very unique character because, in one breath, she sounds very intelligent and educated and learned and smart. So you would
Hmm.
think she'd be able to rationalize that, hey, killing people is bad. imprisoning people before they've actually done something is bad. Um, the list goes on and on and on about the things that are good, that are clear cut, distinct. This is wrong, this is good. But no, she blurs the line because she willingly creates these. And now you're talking about hybrids and genetic splicing, something they
Mm-hmm.
talk about in school, with the little b and the big B's and, the probability of whatever have you. Um, but I digress. I find that the give and take of the good versus the bad, hence all the characters and the casting, I really liked. CJ found it very amusing, but I found it to be one of the strong points of the movie. Obviously, Tom Cruise as John, almost the Baptist. So you have more
Mm-hmm.
water in this. CJ mentioned the bathtub, and they do explain what is the consistency and what it's composed of, et cetera, and
Mm-hmm.
how it's conducive for them to amplify their precog, telepathy, et cetera, et cetera. And I found that unique.
Their Professor Xavier powers. Yeah,
I found I
that's what I'm
found
gonna
that
call it.
Professor X. I found that
That's what I'm
very
gonna call it.
very powerful. The fact that you got John literally constantly running away from his problems and running towards solving them, running from
Mm-hmm.
his destiny and then running into his destiny. So just the fact of John being a strong character, I found that very powerful. And if you've have any inkling about the Bible or studied it or have a little bit of knowledge, you'll know that John the Baptist knew that he was going to die prematurely, but that didn't stop him from continuing on his doing his work. Um,
Yeah, and then plus he's played by Tom Cruise, and I think Tom Cruise has something in his contract that says he's
oh
got to
yeah,
run
yeah, he's got to run.
in every movie that he's in. So like they got to find a way. They got to
To,
find a way for him to run it, deal a quick 50-yard dash at some point in a
no
movie.
question, no question. Another thing that I definitely liked about this movie is the concepts. And we've touched upon them. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but the overall concepts and how they blend and lend themselves to driving this narrative of self discovery, choice versus predetermination. I found that very intriguing. Life, death, consequences, repercussions. How one can be so devoted to their child, and how you wear your heart on your sleeve as a parent, and then
Mm-hmm.
that shocking notion of like discovering that your child is gone and not necessarily abducted, but just in the sense of that loss of innocence. Your kids are
Mm-hmm.
little, they love you, they hang
Mm-hmm.
on to your every word. Then as they grow and develop their own sense of self, they kind of like navigate towards their friends, and it's like the blind leading the blind, which leads to my last point. John was blind and now he can see. The ending does it for me.
Mm.
I really feel that the ending sticks itself,
Mm.
where he even comments to Lamar, "You knew that the one thing that would get me over the edge was the memory of my dead son."
Yep.
And that was, him playing on his heartstrings. So, CJ
Absolutely.
calls him a scumbag, but he is a master manipulator, and rightfully so, because he gives this very heart-wrenching speech towards the end about how at the closing of the Civil War, the
Yeah.
generals were given,
Mm-hmm.
this gun with gold bullets, hence, the contrast of silver bullets for vampires. And then the stunning reveal that, no, you are the culprit. You're the mastermind. You're a serial killer. You're a sociopath and a psychopath. You're the worst. And his wife is
Yeah.
stunned by this because she's the one who's like, how could this be? My whole life
Yeah.
was a lie.
She passes out right
Mhm.
when she
Yeah.
sees it.
She
Yeah.
faints. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I it's funny about until you told me about the fact that this comes from a story from back in the day,
Hmm.
and that the character's name is still John. I actually thought that the reason why they named the police officer John was an allusion to John Walsh, who,
Mm.
remember, had the son Adam
Yeah.
Walsh, who was kidnapped and
America's
killed and
Most Wanted.
everything. Right, who started America's Most Wanted. And the idea of like how the event of losing his son was what drove him to his life of like dedicating his life to making sure that didn't happen to anyone else. So I actually thought that that was the reference point when Tom Cruise's character name is John, and then when you told me everything, I said, okay, cool. So it predates that. But yeah, I think the idea of like Tom Cruise as a character who because of his tragedy, is trying to prevent that from happening, and the way that Lamar manipulates that. It's both of those things are flowing really well. So I like those things. I still think Lamar was a scumbag, but
I think it's
cool.
a
He's a
question of doing the right things for the wrong reasons. And
Yeah,
then, the mere fact that they're literally taking children,
yeah,
creating orphans. And then in Agatha's case, her mom cleans herself up, goes to
hmm,
get her daughter back, and Lamar kills her. I mean,
yeah,
I think the fact too that, you got these people where you mentioned this in the pre-production meeting. Hey, these cops could go up to them and say, look, we know what you're going to do. We've seen this
hmm,
future. Do you really want to
hmm,
continue on this path? This is what lies in store for you. And then all of a sudden, you could avoid recidivism because this is a stark, very up close and personal mention. Like, here's the footage. We
yeah,
recorded this.
yeah. Well, the other thing is that there's a sense in the movie that people, either because they might do something or because they are from a certain socioeconomic level, that they can be treated as less than a human and given a less than
Mm,
human experience. And even Lamar, like the way that he treats he obviously kills Agatha's mother, but it's because her mother was a drug addict, and he feels like she doesn't deserve to have this
mhm,
person anyway. So he has this real superiority, godlike complex, right? And it plays out through his behaviors, which it all makes sense when you get to the end. So yes, I get that, and in that sense, I think the ending actually makes sense.
mhm.
Howsoever, as I as I as I go into the things I didn't like that much, the first like that first capture scene where they have John in the alleyway, it's like 12 dudes and him
Mhm.
in like 14 feet of space, and he gets around them. It's one of the worst choreographed scenes I've ever seen of a fight, where like everybody's like, okay, you go, then I'll go slower than you did. Then I will try to hit him slower than you tried to hit him. It's ridiculous. It's a terrible scene. And I'm watching it and I'm thinking, like, yo, I know Tom Cruise gets busy. Like, he gets down. Like, this movie is like in the same time as Mission Impossible 2,
Yep.
which was like my favorite. John, I know this dude can like do flip kicks and everything. Show
Mhm.
me some of that. Like, I was watching, I'm thinking, is he injured? Like, why is it so slow? Anyway, I hate that fight scene. And then the fight scene with him and Colin Farrell, like, that's the terrible fights. They look like they're wearing pillows on their hands when they punch each other. It doesn't. There's no risk of harm to either of them. Like I'm watching it like, come on, dog. They're just y'all should just thumb wrestle for what you're doing right now,
So Russell.
because they're not really trying to fight hard. So I didn't like those two things. And then my last thing, which was the first thing I mentioned, on the ending, I just felt like this movie, if it would have ended, like, let's say that, okay, the guy, the Crow, actually is the person who kidnapped and murdered his son, and he gets there and he decides not to murder him or not to kill him, and then he arrests him. I would have loved that as an ending. I would have gotten
Mm,
like closure. I think it would have challenged the veracity of the precognition system. It would have raised the questions that you raised before about, if you give people the choice and if you show them what their path is, do they
mhm.
have the ability to change it? It would have just opened those same doors, and I think it would have still ended the movie in pretty much the same place. But then it just went on for another 36 minutes, and I had to find out that Lamar is like one of the most vicious human beings of all time. And then, like, you got John's ex-wife with the eyeball thing. And it's just
Mm.
all kinds of stuff happening that I was like, they could have pulled the plug in it. So that's my things on the hate side.
Well, you do raise some good points with regards to the ex-wife. They do tend John and his ex-wife do still have a, very amicable
Hmm.
relationship. So the cynicism in me is like, man, would an ex-wife really come, break you out of prison, use your eyeballs after she divorced you, said that you reminded her too much of your deceased son? She's not quick to blame you. She says it's not your fault that your son disappeared. Um, you do. She does mention that he bust his gun inside the house, and
Hmm.
she regrets saying that. Like, wow, man,
Yeah,
that's dope. Yeah, it's
yeah,
far fetched, but hey, props to you.
yeah. It is.
I
Yeah,
had
it
a
is.
problem with Wally's character. I mean, if we're just talking about like me nitpicking here, um, Daniel London plays Wally, the caretaker of the trio, the Trinidad,
Oh yeah, he's a
the
weird dude, man.
yeah. I said Trinidad. I mean the triad,
Trinity,
yeah, the
Trinity.
Trinity or the triad. Um, I just I found him too. I can't say
He
the
was
word I want to
he
say.
was
Let's just say
he was
essay or grapish.
he
Like,
was he was skeevy. He was
yeah,
very skeevy
yeah, yeah.
with the way that he was dealing with Agatha, especially with her being unconscious. It just felt like
Yeah, that's what I'm
really
saying, like, it felt
it
like
felt nasty.
yeah,
It was swarmy. It was a
yeah,
swarmy thing. Yeah.
I can't really
Yeah.
put the correct, adjective to it, but it's just very unsettling, and I'm being
Mhm.
very modest with it. Um, but going back to, one more dislike that I had, and really I don't, I'm just really nitpicking, is the fact that this program goes on for years, and it's only run in DC. So you got, child kidnapping, abductions in DC. I mean, what does it say for the state of the nation's capital in the year 2056? Like,
The
I don't
same it
know.
does now, probably.
It's just very unsettling. And,
Mhm.
the fact that the movie is 2 hours and 25 minutes, to CJ's point, there are some scenes that were just filler. Probably could have shaved that down, you know, but I do understand why they're there. And I do
Mhm.
understand the fact that, certain characters, veteran actors, you wanted to give them some shine, so you're talking about, Neil McDonough, Steve, what's his name? Steve. I can't think of his last name right now. Oh, Steve Harris. Steve Harris. So at the time during that era, early 2000s, these guys were, very credible. Even the guy that Tom Cruise beats up, I can't think of his name right now. He usually plays all the creepy guys. He was like the villain in that one movie in which John Claude Van Damme is in prison. This guy's a character actor. He usually plays a lot of violent thug scenes. Um,
Mhm.
so a lot of these guys you can see or recognize by face. Even what's the mom's name from Friday? I can't think of her name right now. Um,
Yeah.
she was in
I'm
it.
not.
She's like the secretary. I can't think of her name right now. I want to say Thelma for some reason. She was in 227.
Yeah,
Or
I think the other thing is like, the reality is that if you get Steven Spielberg as a director, he's not going to do an hour and 30-minute movie.
no, no, no,
Like
no,
he's
never.
you don't bring Steven Spielberg in for that. You don't actually bring Tom Cruise in for it either. And this was a summer blockbuster, so in
Yeah,
that vein, it was gonna be long. People feel like summertime's hot. You want to go sit in a nice, cool
air
movie
conditioned.
theater.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're gonna give you 2 hours of it. With the all the concessions sticking to the floor, hence sticky floors. Shout outs to the
shout
to the
out.
podcast. And yeah, that's how that goes. So you
Oh,
mentioned, you
Anna
got some more.
Marie Anna Marie Horsford is her name.
Okay, okay. Anything else that you didn't like?
No, not really. Like I said, I was just nitpicking here, spitballing. Some of the things I could have done better, but yeah.
Okay. All right. So I got some questions for you. Now, I will say that I feel like we could do a whole show on questioning the mechanics of how this precognition thing actually
Hmm.
works.
Yeah.
I imagine at some point we would need to like draw, like we like diagram art or something, and I don't want to get into all that. It's a lot of holes in this joint to me, but I'm gonna level down to these three questions that I got for you. So the first one, it kind of gets into the precognition part. All right. So once John knows that he's like 15 hours or whatever away from killing somebody,
Mm.
why doesn't he just lock himself in a room with no windows and hide out until after the time is up and then just go down to the station and be like, hey, y'all, I didn't do it. I guess this doesn't work.
Well, other than the obvious, which is the movie would end right then and there, and we
Plot
wouldn't really
armor.
have
Yeah.
a movie. Um, but as we both recognize, it's a plot device. You got
Mhm.
this guy who is supposed to be able to overcome any and all obstacles. He just totally dives into his work. So if he is the poster boy for this program, he can't say, "Hey, there are flaws. These are the obvious flaws." No, he told Lamar, they're not taking this from us. This is our program, meaning
Yeah.
they, the FBI, hence
Hmm.
why Daniel was there. So, in totality, I'm going to say that, he's not going to do that. He's like most human beings, going to say, look, I'm the master of my destiny. I can control my fate. I'm going to beat this just out of pure arrogance and, naivete, if you will, if you want to be nice.
I got it. Yeah. At the point where the strategy was cut out my own eyeballs, break into my own job, melt my face, kidnap a precognitive girl, strip her mind in the from a dude that runs a what might be an illegal video game joint.
Oh,
Yeah,
you're talking about,
I probably would have just hid in the closet, just wrote out. But that's me though. That's me. Everybody don't have to do it that way.
you're talking
All right.
about Rufus Riley. That's the guy
Yeah.
who the character's name is played by
Yeah.
Jason Antoon.
Yeah. A scumbag in the movie. All right. So so here's my next question. Okay. At some point, like why does John's eyes still continue to open doors in these facilities after he's a known criminal and even after he's been captured?
And when you brought this up, at first I was like, well, but then I was like dumbfounded. Like, yeah, when you are fired from a job, they don't allow you access to your computer anymore. They take away your
Right.
card key. Even the cops
Right.
take your gun and your badge. Like they tell you off
Right.
the rip, like, nah, it's a wrap for you, buddy. And
This dude's eyeball is still
it's
opening up
still
doors for
working.
him, man.
I
How is
couldn't.
that possible?
It's not.
Who forgot to take him out of the system? Look, I've been at jobs where when they're firing you, if you don't know, they you go back to your this is back in the day. You go back to your desk, your mouse was gone. And
Hmm.
like if your mouse is gone and you got a desktop, there's like no way for you to figure out how to do anything anymore
Dude, you get
because
the
you need the
escort.
mouse to access the files. Right.
Yeah,
They walk you over the box. Right. You go
you
to your
get the
desk.
box. Yeah.
It's a box. The box is there for you, the paper box, and you got to put your stuff in, and they watch you put your stuff in,
Yeah.
and they
And you
walk you
can't
out.
come back either. No.
And they take all your stuff. So the fact that Tom Cruise, the eyeball, still open the doors, that somebody made a mistake. The technology person at the Department of Pre-Crime made a mistake. All right.
Understatement.
So here's my last question, and this is kind of like a meta question for movies in general. So this movie deals like the idea of like the future and
Mhm.
what happens in the future, all those kind of things. I don't know that it lands the plane as far as that goes, but my question is, what movie best captures how the future works to you?
Yeah, when you brought this up, the obvious movies about, time, you're talking about Time Cop, Back to the
Hmm.
Future.
Hmm.
Um,
Classic.
yeah, I mean, you're talking about any of the Terminator movies.
Hmm.
But for me, I'm going with Endgame, man. Um,
Avengers Endgame. Okay.
yeah. And the reason being is it's just like David Banner's explained, David Bruce Banner's explained. When an individual goes back to the past, that has now become their present and their future. And then when you change that and then you come back to the future, you're now dealing with a different arc, a different branch altogether. So what you thought was going to happen and you just go back to real life and just, instantly add you in the mix, that's not possible. That's not feasible.
Yeah. So you feel like Endgame did the best job of explaining it.
Yeah, definitely.
I used to think that the Terminator did a great job with it
Hmm.
until Terminator Salvation.
Yeah.
Like
Ah.
until they got to the point where John Connor was older
Mm.
than Kyle Reese was,
Yeah.
and he felt like he had to save Kyle Reese because if he didn't, he wouldn't be born when he was already born to begin with. It just the paradox just became too crazy, and then they decided to make John Connor Terminator, and that made it was completely off the rails from that point. All right. Anyway, that's my questions. You got any questions about the movie?
Yeah, definitely. But before we get into that, just want to shout out Cameron Diaz and Frank Grillo for being in this movie on the low. Um, I had to watch
Really?
this. Yeah, I had to watch this movie a few times to actually catch them. Um, Cameron Diaz is a passenger on the train when he's trying to get off and everything. It's quick though. You
Mm-hmm.
got to really look for it. And Frank Grillo is in the opening scenes where he's one of the cops when they first come
Hmm.
down and everybody's getting beat up and stuff. So shout out to
Mm.
them being in this. And on the low, Frank Grillo is in so many movies, man. Um, it's surprising. Almost not on Sam
Yeah,
Jackson level,
so
not on Sam Jack level yet.
no, no. So when you said it, so Cameron Diaz, I'm thinking, as soon as you said that, I thought about Cameron Diaz and Tom Cruise in that movie Vanilla Sky, and the car scene, which is like one of the most scary things that could possibly happen
Yeah,
to a
yeah, yeah.
man dating a woman.
Oh,
I thought about that. And then Frank Grillo, I thought immediately about the Winter Soldier, which, as we talked about earlier,
yeah,
kind of steals the Minority Part Report idea because, in that Winter Soldier part, they're basically saying that they want to turn the shield technology to kill people that might become threats,
yeah.
not people that
Developing the whole
actually are.
algorithm and everything. Yeah, man.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff, man.
Yeah, but see, again, each movie lends itself to the other one where they're building upon these notions of what's going on into the future. So for every
Mhm.
Minority Report, you do have an iRobot. For every iRobot, you do have a Terminator. So,
Mhm.
it gives creative licensing without, not even. And shout out to Tom Cruise and Cameron Diaz being in a third movie together, Night and Day, this,
That's
and as
correct.
CJ referenced, Vanilla Sky.
Vanilla
Um,
Sky, yeah.
so, my questions are for you, sir. Here we go. Is this feasible slash possible? And by it, I'm referring to the technology as well as lending itself to society as a whole.
I really like the idea. Like I said earlier, I like the idea that they tried to create rules around how the precognition thing
Mhm.
works. The idea that if it's a premeditated murder, they can see it 4 days out. If it's a crime of passion, it's like 20 minutes or so. So it's a little bit less
Yeah,
because it's not intentional, so they can't see it. I like that as a rule. I also like the idea of like you need all three in order to get the pictures.
yeah,
And when one of them is gone, then there's no one tracking the murder. So I like the fact that they built like that system. I'm willing to accept that within the system that they built, there's sensibilities to it. My question has always been with the ethics of arresting people who haven't done something yet. But the
definitely.
logic for how they get there, that part makes sense. In terms of the feasibility, I would say, right now we already in a world where people are constantly putting information about themselves into computers, into systems, into servers,
Right.
which are running all these different calculations, algorithms, outcomes, possibilities based on that data. It's not a foregone conclusion to say that sometime 20 years from now, a computer might say Mr. Will is going to do this in this situation based on umpteen hours of data collected from your emails and your text messages and your WhatsApps and your
Hmm.
Facebook posts and your YouTube page. Like that makes sense. So I think in that sense, the idea of technology being able to predict an outcome, it's feasible. It's possible. It's probably happening now. Probably
Mm,
happening to us right now.
I
We
believe
might
it.
be plugged into the matrix and don't even know
Scary thought. Scary
it.
thought. Scary
Yo,
thought.
by the way, just as a quick point, if you're like 15 years old and you have not thought about one day having to fight against Terminators,
Uh,
you may want to start thinking about it because there's so much in this movie that already is here, and there's so much that's already being done. Like the Terminator thing is going to happen. I know, I know
it's
we
just a
joked about it
foregone
earlier.
conclusion. Yeah.
Look, that joint has got everybody. Yo, go out tomorrow. Just start learning how to just jog a mile. Just learn how to jog a mile. Figure
Dude,
out how to survive in the woods.
I
Something
know you've
because
already
it's
seen the Rick Ross joint where he's talking about creating water. So,
yeah,
all those people are going to
right, right.
have bunkers. They're going to
Listen,
stockpile guns. Like
listen.
it's a foregone
Fi-
conclusion.
Figure out something because Judgment Terminator 2 Judgment Day is definitely that's right around the corner.
All I
And
know
movies
is
like and
all I,
movies like iRobot and this and Terminator are showing you that's like what's coming.
Oh
Like,
yeah, no,
don't be surprised.
that's what I was saying. That's my fear of the elderly being locked in their homes because they instead of getting a dog, they got a robot as their companion, and then he just says, or it, or whatever you want to term it, says, "Oh no, you're not going outside.
You
In
ain't going
fact,
outside no
you're
more,
not doing
right?
anything anymore."
Right.
Uh,
What you gonna do? What you gonna do when your car drives you to prison?
I mean,
When you
cars are
let your car.
driving themselves right now to, their repossession centers. I mean, you got the Fords doing that right now. I mean,
It's bugged out.
it's
It's
crazy.
bugged out.
My second question for you, sir, is why does Adderton buy a drug named Clarity from a blind man?
Yeah, that's fun. So first, like that quote about the in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is
Yeah.
king. That's
Mm.
great. That's I just dig that. And I also didn't always get the fact that the reason why the guy chose to be blind was because it stopped him from being scanned.
Yeah.
So you couldn't actually see who he is in the technology world that they were living in. I think the thing with John using the drug in general is that I would say in my experience, when you see people that are so concerned with trying to control variables and options, and when you see someone who, as an officer, is not solving crimes, he's preventing crimes from happening in the first place that would otherwise. That's like the highest level of trying to control things and trying to control outcomes in situations. Usually when someone is like that, they're going to be very tightly wound anyway, and
Yeah.
there's going to be a part of their life that's going to be off the rails to compensate for how rigidly,
Mm.
rigid the rest of their life is. So I think the character is written in a way that he has to have that frailty because he's also like this so plugged into the idea of trying to save everybody in 15 minutes or less kind of thing. I know the movie explains it by saying, well, this is because his son passed away, and that makes sense. But even if you took that dynamic out, you could have written that character with that same issue and it would have made sense to me. I
Mm.
think the clarity is about him trying to create a situation where he's not in control
Mm.
because so much of his life he's constantly has to be or feels like he has to be.
Yeah, and the irony is not lost upon us that the drug is called clarity, something he's seeking, sold by
Mhm.
a blind man who reminds me of the boatman from the River of the Styx. Um,
Absolutely.
and it also harkens to this theme about choice. This gentleman
Mhm.
tells Tom Cruise's character that he chooses to be homeless and blind. Hence, like some of these people in the quote unquote real world who would rather be homeless and they feel that they're free of any possessions,
Mhm.
hence yoga, why they choose to live the lifestyle that they lead. Um,
Mhm.
my third question and final question is Howard kills his wife's lover in a bathtub, but then there's another scenario where he kills him on the bed. Um, Anderton hides from the spiders in a bathtub. He loses his son when he's in the pool when he's trying to hold his breath for the world record, and then Burgess kills Agatha's mom in an ocean. Um, and that's not even taken in consideration. At the end, the children are on an island surrounded by water.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
what is the significance of all that?
So this was a really good question. I think that there's two things that are going on here. One is the idea of water as as a great conductor of spiritual energy
Mm,
and clarity, right? Water, you can see yourself in it, you can
mm,
also see through it. So it has like that dynamic as a part of it. There's also water in the sense of the womb, amniotic fluid, the idea of something being created.
mhm,
So I think like the reason why that keeps coming up is that in those different points that you referenced, water is taking place in a moment where something is being revealed and also in a moment where something is transitioning into a different scale. So the murder that you mentioned in the first scene, that's transitioning the whole different reality for all those people involved. When John is in the water, he comes out, his eyes are different. So now
mhm,
that transitions a whole different reality for him. When you see Lamar killing the lady, him killing that woman is the beginning of a whole new reality.
mhm.
The precogs living on the island with the water around them symbolizes their new reality too. So the water is like the telling the audience, the viewing audience, you're about to see a major transition and
Mm.
the creation of something new that you didn't previously see.
I like that. I like that.
Cool. All right, so let's jump into the popcorn boxes. So this one, I think I like the movie. Obviously that's why we're talking about it. I did have some concerns about like the way the ending kind of drug on and some questions about how the precognition works. I'm making this 3.5 boxes. I think it's worth moving. It's a good watch, but it's not like it's not one of the favorites that we've covered. So I'm giving it 3.5 boxes.
I dig it. I'm also going with 3.5 boxes, not so much for what it lacks and doesn't present, but because of what it does. Found it very intriguing that, the opening scene of Howard's son and his wife going over his son's project about quoting the Gettysburg Address. That's very significant because you're dealing with the establishment of a utopian society, more perfect union, and then you contrast that with the future in this more idealistic world of there's no crime in a program that is founded in the so-called capital of the United States, approximately almost 200 years, yeah, 200 years into the future from when Abraham Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address. But at the same token, as CJ and I have highlighted, you're also dealing with a lot of flaws as far as the logic and the plausibility of these things happening, the holes, such as why you're able to see parts of the future, not all of it, but then the precogs are able to determine about premeditated crimes within a certain time frame versus crimes of passion. They're not able to
Mm-hmm.
see things such as abduction and SA or grape. So I'm going with 3.5.
All right, so look at that, man. We got interrelated reliability on the show.
No doubt.
That's always a good thing there. All right, so as far as like closing thoughts on it, I think we've really touched on it. I mean, this is about the tension between choice and predetermination,
Mhm.
and I think the movie is dealing with that, but I think also the cautionary tale for a viewer at that time was, do you want to live in a world that works this way?
Mm.
Now that you're watching it 2024, you're like, well, what does it mean now that I live in a world that almost works this way? So you gotta look at it a little different. But that's kind of like what I think is being shared on this point. You got any closing thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think I'm going to close with the fact that this is about humanity and being a humanitarian and what it means to be humanistic. There's no such thing as perfection, and there is such thing as perfection. So two things can exist simultaneously, and the duality of that is as follows: you're dealing with individuals who strive to be better. Humanity, as far as my perception goes, is the only beings or or entities that try to create something that surpasses them. They literally try to give birth to their own replacements. So there's something to be said about that. There's hope. This is the only reason why you have progeny. I don't think we try to bring children into the world if we think that this is going to go to hell in a handbasket. I think that the fact that John uh, is encouraged by the fact that he can prevent tragedy befalling another family, and thus the division and family being the main character here, in all essence, whether it be the precogs, Lamar and Dr. Hines being a family, or Agatha and her mom, or as we touched upon, John, his deceased son, and his ex wife, or even with the cops themselves. They're all a family in some way, and they're all
Mm-hmm.
connected, and they're all trying to be better. But simultaneously, like the saying goes, the road to hell was paved with good intentions. And so you have John trying to avoid his future, but instead he's bringing about the demise of someone. And, that gentleman, Leo Crow, his whole thing was about sacrificing for his family. Hey, they promised they'd give me money. They promised they'd give me money. If you don't kill me, I
Mm-hmm.
won't get the money. Um, so, yeah, I just think that in closing, the road to hell is paved with the best of intentions. Sometimes we do go about bringing about our own destruction by trying to be so tightly wound and control everything. And as CJ has often told me, if you want to make God laugh, tell him about your
Tell
plan.
them
So
about your plans. Yeah.
in turn, that's a great segue to the next movie that we're going to bring up. And my choice is I hope that they serve beer in hell. Um,
There,
it plays off of the whole heaven hell theme, and it also has a similar line parallel to this movie that I hope you'll enjoy.
there it is. So that's what it is. So listen, the Sticky Floors podcast is available wherever you get your podcast, whether that is on Spotify, whether that's Apple Podcasts. We have a YouTube channel now as well, which we
Yes,
recently
sir.
started. Please like, subscribe, and comment. Your comments help us to do this better. Peace.